starting in 10. Hi, and welcome to Answers News for February the 11th, 2019. I'm Avery Foley. I'm here with Brian Osborne and Dr. Gabriella Hayes, and we're excited to be here with you again today. We've got a live studio audience. If you guys want to clap and say hi.
Glad you're here. Glad you're here with the A+ team, sometimes called the B team. I think B stands for better, maybe?
Yes.
I'm not sure. Or maybe
I think that's what Ken had in mind.
Maybe the Alpha team. Actually, I think last time we were here, someone called us the Next Generation, which I thought that was kind of,
I like that one.
That works out too.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
By
the way, we will be following on Facebook. Avery has, I think, Ken's Facebook page.
Yep.
I'm going to follow Answers in Genesis.
You're following YouTube.
Gabriella has YouTube.
We'll read some of those comments out as we go along. So we've got a couple just fluff pieces here to talk about while we wait for people to get on before we get to the actual news items. And this one I saw and it just made me laugh, so I thought it might make other people laugh. Men are more likely to order meat on a date to impress women. So apparently, if someone's going on a date with a particular, like a first-time date or whatever, they'll often order, apparently men will often order meat because they're trying to impress the woman. And the reason for this is evolution.
I thought it was because of bacon.
And I thought it was
Bacon's
because
just awesome, therefore you just order it just because it's incredible.
The choices they gave them were like a meat dish, a vegetarian dish, or vegan jerky. Like,
nobody's going to eat that.
Which sounds horrible.
It sounds awful.
No offense if that's your deal, but that sounds pretty rough. I'm going to throw that out there.
But why did they attribute it to evolution, Brian?
Well, because you can attribute everything to evolution. It's so pliable, you can mold it in any way you want. We were joking beforehand. I would bet that this article was about how men ordered a vegetarian dish before their first date. Evolutionists would attribute that also to
somehow
evolution in some way, shape, or form.
They claim it's because our ancestors had to, like, it was a lot of work for them to go out and get meat and whatever, and so it's evolutionary ingrained in us that it's impressive and it shows that that the men can care for the women and provide nutrients, and that's why men order meat on dates.
I think in America, in the Western culture, I think it's the other way around. I think women order meat to impress the men because that's what the men like. If they really want to impress the man, they order bacon. That's just what I'm rolling with overall.
Well, I won't order meat just to impress. It's just I love meat.
And nothing says attractive like chicken in your teeth, right? As you're trying to talk to someone on your first date.
So true.
By the way, we got lots of people popping up from all over the place. Seeing Jennifer and Hannah and Carrie from all over the place. I don't see actually
Pennsylvania,
places.
Oklahoma, South Dakota, and they said it's very cold in South Dakota, which does not surprise me.
Oh, there's Wyoming, all right, West Virginia.
North Dakota.
Yeah. And guys, keep coming in, throw up the thumbs up. That helps the video
Cameroon's
get out on Facebook.
Central Africa.
So. Oh, wow. I'm going there fairly soon.
Someone says, I feel sorry for Dr. Haynes having to deal with us.
The people in the comments.
Yeah.
Good luck with that. Yeah.
And this next one also made me laugh.
This
you
hits
haven't
close
gotten
to home,
to the slides yet, Brian.
Well, there we go. See,
you're still
there
two
I know. I'm just catching up slowly but surely. Multitasking. I'm a guy, not my strongest suit. All right, here we go.
This one's from Canada.
There we go.
Bingo Brawl breaks out at Canadian nursing home.
Wait. Can you read that title one more time?
Bingo Brawl breaks out at Canadian nursing home. So this was at a long-term care facility in Rideau Lakes, Ontario, where these two elderly ladies, one was 79, one was 86, both wanted the same seat at bingo, and neither were willing to give it up. So it broke into a brawl, and then more people joined in. The police had to be called, but nobody was injured, thankfully.
So they were fighting over a seat.
A seat.
Yeah.
And when you see the age, 79 and 86, and they're just like fighting for like just a seat, and then it's like, well, you're gonna expect that from like 2-3 years old, but not.
Apparently, they take their bingo very, very seriously.
Well,
up in
I
Rideau
taught
Lakes.
high school for 13 years, and this is what I expect from high schoolers, maybe middle schoolers. You may have heard the saying, you don't stop playing because you get old because you stop playing. I think we can reword that just a little bit, that you don't stop sinning because you get old because you're a sinner. I think we can reword that just a little bit. Young or old, we're all still sinners. And Avery, since you're from Canada, I just kind of assume this is your future.
Fighting over a seat at bingo,
like 90,
yay.
When you're 90 years old, long way from now.
She's going to be like, this is my seat.
I hope that's not me
That's funny.
in
All
70
right.
years. Oh.
But thankfully, everybody was okay.
Yes, thankfully. All right, now we'll get into the real news
And
now that
I'm
we've had a bit of a laugh.
sticking up with it. There we go.
All right. Planned Parenthood gave mentally ill 20-year-old transgender drugs, mother claims. So this mother claims that her daughter's psychiatrist did not consider her daughter, who's 20 years old, to be transgender. And so the mother assumed, okay, the psychiatrist isn't giving her any kind of, prescription or anything. She shouldn't be able to get a hold of testosterone or anything else. Well, apparently the young woman went to Planned Parenthood and just had to sign some forms and did a blood test, and she was able to get testosterone to start transitioning to male, despite the fact that her psychiatrist did not think that was a good idea.
And Avery, who were the people bringing this up, making note of this?
This was a group of radical feminists that were talking about how the so-called Equality Act is actually basically a women's erasure act, is what they're saying. So it's interesting because these are like radical feminists,
Sure.
and they're saying that the whole transgender movement is kind of spiraling out of control, and it's taking over women's rights, and it's just.
Well,
Yeah.
it's a really good example of how the secular worldview will eventually blow itself up. Because if you start declaring there are no males and no females, if that's your big movement, then how can you defend women's rights if there are no women by definition? It's an arbitrary assertion.
Right,
so that worldview will blow itself up ultimately, which is what we see here. And it's kind of fun to read the article. You see them kind of attacking each other.
Yeah,
for
all
a
these
change,
different liberal
which
groups
is
that are just kind
nice,
of like.
from our perspective. And by the way, we've seen this effect in women's sports as well. The more people start redefining male and female, there's no such thing. Now so-called transitioning males are playing in female sports. And guess what? They win. Because typically they are bigger, stronger, and faster. Physically, it's just what happens.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing the effects
difference.
on women because of this transgender movement in multiple ways.
And again, Planned Parenthood with the culture of death, because if they need to promote their agenda, and if they need to hurt you to murder, they will do just to promote the agenda. So like they're hurting this person, giving this hormone, and it's just like sad to see that the family is trying hard to say like, no, she has mental problems, so don't do that. But they don't care. They're just gonna keep doing it just because of their agenda.
Yeah, it's not hard to get these hormones at all that can change women permanently and permanently scar them for life. And you can get them fairly easily. A quote from the article says, in only one visit with just a little bit of blood work, Planned Parenthood will cheerfully enable young women and men to pursue their authentic selves through cross-sex hormones. All that's needed are a few bucks and signing a form, and you can get those hormones to change yourself.
That's crazy.
Which honestly, we should not be surprised to see that from a secular perspective, a secular worldview. It's horrific, but it should not be a surprise.
Yeah. All right.
By the way, somebody on here mentioned that maybe the ladies from the bingo brawl, maybe they had dementia, so they might forget about it the next day, and it won't be a big deal.
Could
for
be,
them.
maybe.
I don't know.
Who knows?
People signing in from California. Good to see everybody.
Me and
Hey,
Casper,
Karen.
UK,
Good stuff.
Michigan, Florida. Probably a little warmer down there.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Little
not bad
jealous
here
of that.
anymore.
Not too
We were
bad.
having some
Yeah,
nicer
yeah.
weather, just a lot of rain. I'd rather have snow, but most people don't agree with me on that one.
I disagree. My wife would agree.
All right, so this past weekend is considered Evolution Weekend. There's this push to celebrate Evolution Weekend right before Darwin's birthday, which is tomorrow, February 12th. And it's this idea of getting churches to celebrate evolution, to celebrate Darwin, and to include some of that as part of their service about how what they call science and religion aren't at odds with one another. And the theme this year for this Evolution Weekend was the confluence of religion and science. So how these agree with each other, which we would agree with. Science and biblical Christianity are not at odds with one another.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We say often, I know Bodhi says this very often as he sits over there, that you can do science because the Bible is true. That the God of creation made not only the physical world, but he also made the non-material world. He made the laws of logic, which is why we can reason. He made us in his image. That's why we can reason with those very same laws. He's revealed himself to us so we know from his word. He made the laws of nature and holds them together by the power of his word. That's why he can do science to begin with. You can only do science because the God of the Bible is the creator and the Bible is true. which is an awesome thing to think about. So we would agree with that. So there's not a conflict between real science and real Christianity, but there is a conflict between humanism and Christianity, and that's really what people tend to miss as they go into this article in more detail.
And that's what they're talking about here, religion and science. By science, they're not talking about knowledge, they're just talking about evolution.
Yeah.
So that's the point.
Sure.
Sometimes they use the word science meaning a different thing. So it's interesting here because they say that right here, they say, let me see. They try to use the idea that a lot of people are agreeing with that science and religion, they can go together. What we believe when you say by meaning science, it's knowledge.
Sure.
So
yeah.
it's just interesting because they say a lot of people, they're believing this, so that doesn't mean anything. Because a lot of people is agreeing with that, that means that it's truth. It doesn't mean that, because when you check the whole information about this week, it's very mystic. It's very
you went and looked at the supplemental liturgical resources they provide. You should read some of the one poem.
Yeah.
They provide like poems and prayers and songs and things that you can use in your congregation to celebrate
and here
Evolution Weekend.
They say we're here descended from stardust. I heard someone saying that.
Yeah.
Yes, that
Very
would be an
common
atheist.
refrain nowadays.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And gather of galaxies created of carbon. From the first tremblings of a vibrant planet, we evolve. So the evolution of our cousins, the encoding of our kin. So it's just everything about evolution, everything about mystic.
And typically they're equivocating on that term evolution.
Right, yeah.
They'll use it one time to describe variation within a kind. Dogs make dogs, cats. Then they'll use evolution to explain the idea of molecules to man evolution and call that the same thing.
Right, it's not the same thing.
It's not at all. They're two very different things. They're going in different directions. Or they'll equate science with the idea of evolution, which is not equated at all from a big picture perspective. But that's the typical thing you'll see, whether it's in textbooks, in museums, when you're watching National Geographic, is the equivocating of those particular terms, science and evolution, as they do in here.
And in one of the poems that they provide, it basically says that if God created the way that he created in the Bible, that he says he created, that just makes him into a wizard who just like waved his magic wand and voila, there's the earth and the universe, which is actually something that Pope Francis has said as well. He's basically compared that God to a wizard if God created the way that he said he did in the Bible. And so in the poem, they go on to say, no, God created slowly over millions of years using evolution. But believing that God did what he said he did, that the all-powerful creator can simply speak things into existence, doesn't make God into a wizard. It makes him the all-powerful creator that he is, doing things the way that he said that he did them.
Exactly, and that kind of ties in well with this particular quote from the article, where they're talking about how science and religion go together in searching for truth. That's what they say they're both doing. And they make this statement: while truth can be elusive, and while we may often never be certain that we've actually uncovered it, it is something we should aspire to discover. So in other words, they're both searching for truth. Maybe we'll never find it, but we should still be looking for it through science or religion. But that is totally antithetical to the biblical worldview. The Bible says, no, there is absolute truth, and we can know absolutely. Why? Because the absolute authority, God himself, told us what he did in his word. And then we use that truth revealed from him as our framework to understand the world we're looking at today. And so that biblical worldview gives you that absolute foundation. Every other worldview cannot. They are shifting sand.
They say that 16,000 members they're involved with this movement, and this is a sad number.
Yeah.
It's a really sad number.
Sure.
It's not something that should be celebrated, but something that we need to be very careful.
They also talk about how they say here the teachings of religion and science can support one another. And this group has, for example, taken positions against the separation of immigrant children from their parents, against racism, against homophobia and Islamophobia, and in favor of developing a greater environmental ethic. They go on to say that each of these positions makes sense from a theological and scientific perspective.
Wait. They make sense theologically for each of those positions?
That's what they say.
Whose theology?
Whose theology, exactly. Whose theology forms the basis for that. And then they go on to say, each of these positions can be defended on the basis of evolutionary biology. And I was like, you can't consistently defend like racism using evolutionary biology. Well, if we all evolved, then it makes sense that there would be higher races and lower races.
Which
and
is what
Darwin
Darwin
himself
thought.
was extremely racist. If you read his works, like, it's ridiculous. So no, you can't consistently argue against racism from the perspective of evolutionary biology. And why should we protect the Earth? Why should we care about the planet from the perspective of evolution? It's survival of the fittest. If we're the fittest, who cares about anything else, right? Like, it's not consistent. Sure, you can say that you can do that, but not consistently.
Yeah. And again, I think the key take home from this is that there's no real conflict between real science and the Bible. There is conflict between a biblical interpretation of present-day evidence and a secular interpretation of present-day evidence. Same evidence, two different interpretations based on two different worldviews.
Interpretations.
And that's where so often people speak past each other on this particular topic. Hey, before we move on, I want to say hey to Brian Daniels, a friend of mine. He's on here. I got a lot of friends on here. People from North Carolina. That's my home state. Good to see some North Carolinians out and about. And Roger, Kevin, a bunch of other people. Glad you're hopping on from Kansas City. Good to see you guys. Good barbecue in Kansas City, by the way. Throwing that out there. We'll find out.
Yeah, someone here from Colorado too.
Colorado. It's cool to see people hopping on from everywhere.
And then we got this next article in conjunction
Which ties in with this
that
one.
And I remember to click the button.
Good job.
Really excited.
Good job, Brian.
I'm on track.
Just a little bit before that, my sister, she just got on here. She's like, Gabriella's sister's watching from Brazil. Say hi to her favorite sister. Okay, yeah.
How many sisters do you have?
One.
Okay. All right. That makes sense.
See, I can't say I have a favorite sister because I have 6 sisters and I'm getting a lot of trouble if I said I had a favorite sister.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Oh, that's funny.
All right. Skepticism about Darwinian evolution grows as 1,000+ scientists share their doubts. So this is an article sort of coming out around, again, this Darwin Day idea.
Right.
And saying that this is a letter that can be found at dissentfromdarwin.org that's been signed by over 1,000 scientists. And these aren't necessarily creationists. They're not necessarily even people who believe in intelligent design or anything like that. These are scientists who are willing to sign a statement that reads, "We are skeptical of claims for the ability of random mutation and natural selection to account for the complexity of life. Careful examination of the evidence for Darwinian theory should be encouraged." So they're saying that mutations and natural selection, which are considered to be the primary driving forces of evolution, are not sufficient to explain everything we see around us. And that's what they're signing here. They're not necessarily saying they believe the Bible or anything like that.
That's actually against evolution.
Right. Yeah.
Because it goes against the whole direction of evolution has. And which is interesting because they say here that the theory should be encouraged. Like, you need to examine the theory, but that's not what they taught us in college. They just say, well, you have to believe, and they keep pushing the same idea of you trying to understand everything with the lenses of Darwinian theory.
And we would agree with the core comment here that yes, natural selection and mutations cannot explain the origin of life. It just cannot do it. With real observational science, natural selection and mutations tend to shuffle existing genetic information and produce variations of kinds. Dogs make dogs, cats, cats. That's what we observe. We never observe a cat changing into a dog or a dog into a whale, which is what evolution would suggest given a long enough period of time. And so we would agree with that core comment. And another person mentions that 1,000 people have signed this particular petition, but many are afraid to speak up. Because basically, in the Western culture, particularly in America, if you question the evolutionary dogma, you put your job and career on the line.
And you said it's similar in Brazil.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be interesting when some of my colleagues start seeing Answers News and seeing me here.
You will get letters.
My husband always says, like, you're going to go to the blacklist. And I was like, yeah.
Won't take very long.
And they said this, the fact that most won't admit to the problems of evolution exposes the unhealthy effect of peer pressure on scientific discourse. And indeed it does. There's actually one Chinese scientist who made this comment. In China, we can criticize Darwin, but not the government. In America, you can criticize the government, but not Darwin. And that seems to be the tenor of our culture in regards to this. And by the way, the reason for this is because evolution is the secularist best explanation to explain life without God.
As soon as
so
you
they
don't have
hold
evolution.
to that with religious fervor because it's part of their religious worldview, because we're all religious by definition. And so it really comes back to that core heart issue, whose word are you trusting in, what religion do you adhere to, God's word or man's?
Yeah, the promoters of the series Evolution, among others, claim that virtually, which is interesting, they use some of those words that doesn't mean really anything. Virtually every scientist in the world believes the theory to be true.
Yeah.
So the words that they're using, it's believe, it's faith.
Yeah.
You know, so it's interesting that they claim to not have faith, but they do.
And by the way, that's a common thing you'll hear. That's called the no true Scotsman fallacy. And you see this all the time within evolutionary circles. Well, no scientists,
no credible scientists.
Yeah, no scientists, all scientists believe in evolution. Well, all credible scientists believe in evolution. When Bill and I was here talking to Kim Ham at the Ark Encounter, Bill and I made that very statement. He said, well, hey, you know, scientists all believe in evolution. And Ken said, well, we've got some really good PhD scientists here who don't. And Bill said, well, your scientists don't impress me. They're not real scientists because they don't line up with his particular worldview. And that's a fallacy you see again.
He didn't even talk to them.
Again.
No, he didn't even talk.
Not at all.
But they're like, I'm not impressed. You didn't even talk to them.
And if you want to learn more about sort of how evolution ideas just don't explain the world around us, we have two excellent books I want to recommend. One is called Glass House, and it is available for pre-order. It's not out yet, but you can pre-order it from our website, and the social media team will put the link in the comments. And if you pre-order it now, you actually can get a download of the ebook for free, so you can start reading it right away, but the book will come a little bit later. And we also have this awesome book, Replacing Darwin, by Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson, who has a PhD from Harvard. It is an excellent, excellent book, looking at how it has a testable prediction from a young Earth creation model, and it's an excellent book and shows how, genetically speaking, evolution simply can't explain the diversity of life around us. So you can order a copy of that from our website as well. It's absolutely excellent.
Lots of good resources. Also on our website, someone mentioned in the chat here, you can see a whole list of really good, smart PhD scientists who actually believe, get this, the Bible. And something we often say, most people don't recognize, pretty much every major branch of modern day science was started by a Bible-believing Christian, most of whom believed in a young earth, like the Bible clearly teaches and implies. Pretty impressive stuff. By the way, I want to say hey to Tony and Trish, who evidently are in the audience. They chatted on here. I saw you guys. Yeah, glad you're here. All right. And Sherry from Georgia. Hey to you as well.
Someone said here, they call Avery the millennial, but I wonder how old she is. Well, I just sneak in as a millennial. I actually celebrated my birthday this weekend. Groundhog's Day is my birthday, and just turned 25. So I'm getting up there in age.
You're almost Generation Z.
Almost. 1 year.
Really close.
It's like 1 year off or something. But yes, I'm at the very, very tail end of the millennials.
I am not even close.
I'm old now. I'm 25. So
don't say that.
All right. Next one.
Democrat Patty Murry blocks Senate bill banning infanticide after failed abortions. So this woman basically blocked the unanimous passage of what's called the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, which would basically require doctors to provide life-saving care to a child that happened to survive an abortion and was born alive. And she blocked this bill because she didn't think it was needed or necessary. And as you read through the rest of this article, all these people are coming out and saying, this is horrific, that we have politicians today who can't even stand against infanticide.
And let's be clear, that's what the bill was simply about, to say you cannot do infanticide. That's what it basically said.
If a baby is born alive, you need to help them live.
She used a wording excuse to explain why she was rejecting the bill, but her motives are clear from what she said elsewhere. But if we can't agree that infanticide is wrong, it kind of shows you where our nation is at.
And when I was reading through this, as horrible and despicable and unfathomably evil as the idea of infanticide is, it's just the logical next step, because that child that survived the abortion, they were literally trying to kill that child 2 minutes before.
Right.
So what difference does a difference in location make? Why is it okay to kill the baby before the baby's born, but as soon as the baby's born, all of a sudden that's a moral horror that we would kill that child? Absolutely, it's a moral horror that we would kill that child. It's also horrific that we would consider killing that child at any gestational age. The only thing that's changing is the location of the child or the level of development, and that's no reason why someone should die.
But But it's only a moral horror if there's an absolute lawgiver who says
Yes.
that it is a moral horror. Without an absolute standard to hold everything to, then really morality is just relative. And so we shouldn't, like, as you're saying, we should not be surprised to see this sort of decline in morality in our culture, because we've abandoned God's word as our authority. All that's left is man's word, which is subjective at best to each individual person. That's why someone like Patty Murry can stand up and say infanticides are not that big of a deal. Let's go for it in her worldview, basically.
Yeah, what hurts me so bad about this is what kind of doctor, what kind of mom would just see your baby in agony, like
not want to help
Sure.
that
and not
child.
wanting
Like,
to help the
Yeah.
baby. You know, you don't do that to an animal. You don't do that to anyone. And then, and the thing is, what kind of doctor do you want to have that you know that the doctor does that? If the doctor is not
Yeah.
caring about the baby in agony, why the doctor is going to care about you?
go find a different doctor.
Yeah, and then it just,
Sure.
I cannot even imagine that that scene, like seeing a baby suffering, and you just be like, well, leave it to die.
Yeah,
That's
it's
And
unfathomable.
by the way, another quick point before we leave this particular article, there's a quote in here from a different senator talking about the whole issue, how it's so bad. And they made this statement I thought was a very good observation. Just a few years ago, the abortion lobby was really clear in its talks about hoping abortion would be safe, legal, and rare. And now we're talking about keeping the baby comfortable while doctors have a debate about infanticide. And that just shows you the absolute moral decline of our culture. That is the definition of a real slippery slope
Yeah.
in our day and age. By the way, on a happier note, Gabriella, somebody asked on here, are you a millennial as well?
ooh, that's a good question. I don't know if I should.
I want to answer that one.
Okay, I am 34. Am I a millennial?
Does that make you? I don't know. I forget what the beginning year is when they start.
Right.
We have people nodding in the audience, so.
Am I? Yay!
look
I
at
am. Thank you.
So
Have
it's just not Brian.
Yeah, I had to give my birth date to somebody about a week ago, and they were in their 20s, and I told them my birth date, and they looked at me, they said, wow, you don't look that old. Which was kind of like a backhanded compliment, like you don't look that old, but you are that old. By the way, I'm just going to throw this out there just to have fun with Ken. Hannah posted this in our comments. Evolution must be true. It's obvious Brian is higher evolved than Ken. So I'm not saying that's true at all. I'm just reading what she wrote and trying to keep my job. All right, there we go.
All right. Triassic lizard king ruled Antarctica before the dinosaurs. So this is talking about an iguana-sized dinosaur. The well, you say it with your Brazilian accent because it sounded really cool
It does
when
sound
you
a lot
said
cooler.
it.
Okay, Antarctanax shackletoni.
Which is way cooler than how I
Did you say
it.
Shaka Khan? No? Okay, making sure. By the way, what did they find again? They found a lizard?
They found a dinosaur.
A variation of reptile,
It
Yeah.
was an
right?
incomplete
Yeah.
fossil.
Incomplete fossil, yeah.
And this is a great example. We mention this all the time, but whenever you read these sorts of articles, just be sure to separate the fact from the fiction. You'll see the facts about the size of the bones, where they found the bones, and details of the bones and so forth. But then there's a lot of fiction about the age and stuff like that.
Yeah, so they're talking about how, okay, well then millions of years ago Antarctica was a beautiful tropical paradise where this dinosaur lived, but that's the millions of years ago part is an interpretation. What they're seeing is the fossils. They're seeing the fossil of this reptile. They're seeing fossils of different plants and things that point towards a tropical climate. But the age of this is an interpretation based on their worldview.
Yeah, it's interesting because
Yeah.
they found one fossil here, like it was incomplete, and now they put everything. They put plants, insects, all together in this environment. And I was like, that's really interesting because you have a lot of information from an incomplete fossil. So it's just interesting to see how much they added up to the conclusion. Another point that is really interesting is because they admit that we actually had a global extinction event.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
And that's really interesting because they don't know what happened, when that happened. I mean, they know that when that happened, of course, in the evolutionary ideas, but they do know that something really huge happened that whipped out around 96% of all marine species and approximately 70% of vertebrates. So it just, something really happened, and it was global.
And
I
by the
wonder
way,
what it was.
There's
Yep.
a lot of good evidence in that area of forest that used to be there, remnants of forest, because before the flood, it was a different world. The world was wrecked at the time of the flood. You go to Genesis 6:13, it says that God's purpose with the flood was to destroy both the people and the earth. The flood, with this cataclysmic event, literally wrecked the world, reshaping the topography, the landscape, and all sorts of things, destroying the world that was then. Our world today is a junkyard compared to what it used to be from that catastrophe. There we go. I'll spit it out eventually.
That was
Easy
a
for me to say.
catastrophe.
It's the first kind of pun for the day.
Yeah, it's actually like my first pun on the show, I think.
No, get out of here. Come on now.
It wasn't even a good one.
Another point, they say they use the word must. So it's just interesting because when you use the word must, it's just showing the worldview. And they say, even if we don't have a good fossil record of them from this time, it must be true. It must has existed. And I was like, that's faith. If you don't have the fossil, how do you know that that existed? Because that's not science.
Yeah.
You got to observe to make assumptions like that, but they haven't observed anything. They're just assuming that that's true.
Someone on here asked, they said, Brian, the women have given their ages, more or less. How old are you? I'll put it this way. I was born before 1980. How about that?
All right.
That's somewhat close-ish. Yeah.
All right, I think we've got time for one more here, and we'll end on a kind of a fun one. Another one from Canada. You can.
Did you pick these articles?
I actually
You
didn't.
are so
Georgia
biased.
picked them. I picked the bingo
Whatever.
one,
Not buying
but
it.
I'm going to try to find some from Brazil.
Yeah, you
yeah,
should.
that would be
Exactly.
good. New insect discovered in Canada may be survivor from the last ice age. So deep in a cave in Canada, they found a previously unknown insect.
Which there
that's
are a lot of weird things in
interesting
Canada,
looking.
so that's fair. Just kidding.
Ouch. Thanks,
I've never
Brian.
been. I'm just
Did you just say you've never been?
I've never been. No, just making this up. All right.
You need to come sometime. You
I
travel
will.
all around the world speaking.
I
You
know.
need to come to Canada
We'll talk to
sometime.
Calvin, who's got the branch up there.
It's the,
get
yeah,
up there.
it's the best country.
No. Brazil is.
Oh, I've never been to Brazil, so I guess I can't speak to that. But basically, this cave was covered by a thick ice sheet. And now that the ice sheet is receding, they're able to explore and see what's down there. And they found this cool little subterranean insect.
And to be clear, it's a variation of an insect we already kind of knew about. It's a different species of the same basic kind of insect. It's cool, but nothing evolutionary about it, at least from a big picture perspective. Just variation within the kind, like God created them to be from the very beginning.
It was found near Vancouver, British Columbia. We actually have people in the audience who are from Vancouver, British Columbia,
you go.
so that's kind of cool.
Did you guys find it? No? Okay, just making sure.
You'll have to go look for it now that you know it's there.
That's awesome. Oh, gotta say hey to my friend Zeke, who's watching, and a bunch of other people as we begin to wrap up.
Yes.
Are we done for today?
I think we are. We're out of time.
Out of time.
But
Too sad.
the other team will be back on
The other
Thursday with another episode of Answers News. So hopefully you can join us then. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.
Have a good day.